Welcome to the Golden Age of Cinema podcast, a film review show where our panelists share their take on films from the Golden Age of Cinema, the 1990s.
Good evening and welcome to episode 8 of the Golden Age of Cinema. This week we are here to discuss Groundhog Day, and as with every week I want to introduce my guests, Mike Holmes and Seb James. Good evening, gents.
Hello, Matty.
Good evening, Matthew. I'll just run through a quick introduction. So Groundhog Day, made in 1993, is the fantasy comedy directed by Howard Ramis and written by Howard Ramis and Danny Rubin. Stars Bill Murray as Phil Connors, the TV weatherman who is assigned to covering the annual Groundhog Day, but is caught in a time loop where he has to repeat and relive the same day over and over and over again. Andy McDowell and Chris Elliott also star. It was a modest success on release, got a lot of positive reviews, budget of just under £15 million, made good box office of over 70 million just in North America alone. What's a testament to this film is now the term Groundhog Day has kind of gone into popular culture slang, if you like, and is commonly used to describe a recurring situation. In 2006, this film was added into the United States National Film Registry as being deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. It has a stage musical adaptation which premiered a couple of years ago in 2016. I don't know if anyone's seen that. I don't know if anybody wants to see that, but it's a personal favourite film of mine.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised actually what you said there, that it was a mild box office success. It's kind of one of those films that it's a critically acclaimed pairing in Howard Ramis and Bill Murray. I think we touched upon it at the end of the last podcast. This film being the one that led to their breakup, so to speak, their professional falling out. But yeah, really, really enjoyed watching this again. So first impressions, Mikey, as the most vintaged member of our trio, maybe you could give us a bit of background into your first impressions when you watched this, what you thought of it when you came to rewatching it, and a bit of background as to when you maybe watched it the first time.
To do that, Matty, I'd have to take you both back to the halcyon days of mid-1994. Not the winter of our discontent. It was very much a golden year.
A golden age.
Golden age, indeed, for movies, music, and other things. So I saw this on video. I'm going to have a stab at August of 1994, somewhere around then. In those days, the video shops that were around used to do these sort of deals where you could get 5 or 6 slightly older VCR tapes, rent them for a week, for a cheap price. What this tended to lead to was you wanted to get your money's worth, so you tended to watch these movies over and over again, to get your money's worth, and that's what happened with Groundhog Day. In this sort of week-long period, it might even have been 2 weeks, but in that period, I seem to recall watching it 4 or 5 times, getting the full Groundhog Day effect, so to speak. From memory, I quite enjoyed it at the time. It was an interesting movie. I thought it was quite funny. Bill Murray, great actor. Ghostbusters was very much a popular film of my generation, and he was so dominant in that, so central to that, and some of the films that followed, and he did this. I'm going to argue he sort of plays a bit of Venkman in this. I think.
Yeah, I think he just is Venkman.
At least initially. I seem to recall I didn't read any great. I mean, perhaps I should have, but I didn't read any sort of great meaning into it. I just thought it was, it was an interesting sort of concept. It was fun. It was funny. It has a happy ending. So from memory, I really enjoyed it, and yeah, I mean, as Seb has pointed out, it very much entered the lexicon of the English language, certainly American English language, and in Australia to a lesser extent, because American culture is quite through television is quite formative. So fundamentally, I enjoyed it.
Interesting. Looking back, experiencing it firsthand, Mikey, when it came out. Always good when we go back to these vintage years to get the outlook from yourself.
Indeed.
Seb.
If only I could take you back to 1994, Matty.
Oh, it was a great year. Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo. I loved it. Seb, you weren't even born. Interesting. How did you come to this?
Actually, let's have a look. The release date, I was not even born on the release date, which is February 12th, 1993. I came to this, obviously, a lot later. I think I must have been maybe between 8 or 10. I can't even put my finger on it for the first time that I watched this film. But I was introduced to it by my dad, who this is one of his favorite films. And he introduced it to me and we watched it together. And it's just hilarious. I just found it so funny. And since then, I've watched it again and again and again, because that's the whole point. Whenever my dad recommends that we watch this film again, and someone comes with the counter argument of, oh, well, we've already seen this one. It's like, yes, but that's the whole point, because you have to watch it again and again and again to, as Mikey did in that 2-week period, get that full Groundhog Day experience. And in fairness, before we, as we were sort of drumming up the shortlist for the films that we were going to review for this podcast, I actually hadn't seen this film in a fair while. And shortly after we drummed up the shortlist, I rewatched it, and I rewatched it again recently. And I just think it's so, there is a bit more to it. The jokes are still really funny. The little word plays, the little, the way that Bill Murray sort of plays it. Yes, it's very Venkman. Yes, it's very snarky. It's very sarcastic, and it's very deadpan. It's classic Bill Murray. I think if I was able to show, if someone asked me, some alien came down from the heavens and said, show me a classic Bill Murray performance, I'd show them this film.
If only you'd have shown such dedication to the cause in one of your earlier choices, and in 4 rooms thrown yourself out of a window. But no, I fully agree with that. It's my first time I watched this. Actually, I didn't actually watch it in English. I watched it in a cinema in Siena, which is where I did my year abroad. I'd never really come across it, but obviously heard of it. The cinema where I was studying on my year abroad was doing, it did classic film night, and what it used to do. And Mikey, you'll like this, given that you're half Yorkshire, already told us that you like getting your money's worth. It showed the Italian version, and then straight over the course of a week, there was another night where they showed the English version. So it was really clever. So I actually watched it first in Italian and then English, and the jokes translated really well. But I remember thinking at the time, Bill Murray's a bit of a dick, but I really enjoyed it, and that happened again, because when you suggested this, I was like, oh. But despite myself, it's really well written. It's got a really good good story to it. And actually, to me, when you hear the premise that you're going to see scene after scene repeated, obviously the same day is being repeated all the time, it just had a really there's a couple of scenes like the scene with Nancy. I'm sure we'll get onto it, Mikey. It's just like quite good, clean fun, isn't it, how it's done?
Yeah.
It's really well written, and it was just a really nice thing to revisit it. But I do remember at the time sitting there, first time that I watched it, really enjoying it. And Howard Ramis, no longer with us, unfortunately, just actually a really good exponent of that form of comedy. He did direct Ghostbusters, didn't he?
He did, and Caddyshack.
Oh, I didn't know he did that. But yeah, just really a really good, enjoyable film. Well, with that, I'll jump on to what we'd like to explore next in what we think some of the dominating themes are of the film. And we've had a bit of a back and forth on this earlier in the week. And I think there's some quite contrasting views emerged already. But Seb, what are you seeing emerging here when you watch this? Because it is quite a contrast. I think I saw it a bit differently to you guys, but what are you seeing when you watch this?
So yeah, I think part of why this film is really good is because it's very, very well constructed. It's a very well planned and executed film. I think the editing is something that's really, really good, and I'll get into that a little bit later when I talk about my favorite scene. But also, every good film has to have a very good message behind it. And I think this is a little bit of a it can be taken a bit of a metaphor for life in general, really. I mean, you've got someone who, we've all been in a situation where we feel like it's Groundhog Day. We feel like we're going to the same job, doing the same thing, living the same routine, living the same day. And, in those situations, you can do lots of different things with your life. You can, as Bill Murray finds out initially when he's living the same day over and over again, first he goes a little bit crazy. Then he finds out that, well, if there's no tomorrow, then there are no consequences. And so he drinks and he eats like a glutton and he steals and
kills himself.
Well, we'll get onto that. And so, he finds that there are no consequences. So he goes off the rails. He has all this fun. He has all this stuff without any consequences. But he soon finds that, he has his one night stand with Nancy where he promises her the world and everything, keeps on calling her Rita, which is really funny. And then, and then he, finds, oh, okay, well, I quite need the, he gives himself the challenge of wooing Rita. So, yeah, so then he goes in and there's that scene in the coffee shop where he's like, what do you like? What's your ideal man? And he says, wow, geez, I'm really close on this one, which is really funny. And then for the next sort of beat of the film, he tries all of these quite gimmicky ways of wooing her. So, finds out his favorite drink, finds out the poetry, goes through, is like taking all these mental notes. And that's when the editing is really, really good, because you see the same point in the same point in a different day with the immediate progression, which I really, really loved. But you see this sort of like progression, he's doing it, but every single time he keeps on getting a slap, at the end. And it's because he's not doing it with the right intentions. And then he obviously goes mad, tries to kill himself, and then he says, I'm a god. And I think that's when the film kind of turns, and he genuinely falls in love with Rita, and he says, I'm not good enough to deserve you. I don't deserve you, or something like that. And from that point on, he makes the best of his situation. Instead of taking advantage of his situation, he takes advantage of it in another way for his own self-improvement. He gets these piano lessons. He does all of these good deeds. He finds out all of the catastrophes that happen in the day, and he solves each and every one of them. And what they are selfless tasks. He gives himself to the town of Puxatawney. He becomes Puxatawney Phil, if you like. Yeah, I went there. And through the self-improvement, he becomes good enough to earn the love of Rita. And that's when the life moves on, only at that point, only when he's worked hard enough to actually improve himself to earn the honest love of an honest woman, honestly. I think it's a great message of self-improvement about how you can live your life in general.
And given how cynical I know you are in general, Seb, that's quite heartwarming, that.
Yeah, well, it's a heartwarming film.
Mikey, how about you?
I have to say, Sebi, that's actually quite beautifully put. I'm not sure.
He had it in him.
I'm surprised. I'm not sure, in truth, that I can really add much to what Sebi has said, other than, initially I did sort of wrangle with, is he really deceitful? As I was rewatching the film a few days ago, And Sebi's talked about he takes advantage of his situation, and he really does sort of try to get Rita through deceitful means, and I agree. Ultimately, it is a story about self-improvement. There's a message, I think, more broadly for people watching it, because as Sebi's rightly pointed out, we've all been stuck in a rut at some stage of our lives, going to the same job, doing the same routines, effectively stuck in the same day, on repeat, day after day. I think that's partly why it's entered the lexicon of the English language as, it's Groundhog Day, just another day at the office, etc. But I think ultimately it is about self-improvement. I think it is very much a heartwarming tale, and I like what Sebi said about ultimately his intentions are honest. Goes around eventually solving the town's problems and being the best version of himself. He's forced to look at himself and confront the realities of who he is, within the context of this strange and surreal situation. But ultimately, he embraces the change, and he improves himself, and when he's done that, then he's able to progress. And I think that there's a wider message for all of us in that.
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting is his attitude in general, but specifically his attitude to the town, right? Because in the first scenes, he's reluctantly going to do his fourth Groundhog Day, and then funnily, when he's in the van on the way up, he says, "This will be the last time that I cover the groundhog," or whatever, because I'm moving on to some big network, which is hilarious because he ends up doing it umpteen more times after that. But he has this attitude, this not hatred, but disdain for Middle America, Puxatawny, and all of that, and he sees himself totally above it. But then at the end, his character goes through this big arc, falls in love with the town, and at the end is like, let's live here. That's what he says, I think, at the end.
Yeah, you're kind of stepping on my toes a little bit there.
Sorry.
What I was going to say, but no, it's. I think it's really interesting because I think American culture, more so than a lot of societies, it's all about how much you can progress, and generation upon generation, or you've got to become better than what that was before, and how that embodies itself in Phil is. There's that opening scene when his physical comedy when he's delivering the weather, that scene where when he's pushing the high pressure up, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, and then he says, "Oh well, I'll have you know that a big network's going to come for me." So he not only thinks he's above Puxatawny, so he not only thinks he's above Puxatawny, but he thinks he's above his job, he thinks he's above his network, and he thinks he's on the verge of being picked up by a big cable network for a contract. And to me, that's quite endemic and representative of his disdain for what you said, Seb, of Middle America. It's not okay to settle. He's better than this little town. But actually, through the experience of what he goes through, he comes to appreciate it. And yet, he stepped on my toes right at the end, and he says, "Well, why don't we move here?" And I actually just thought, it's quite a feel-good element, isn't it? To actually just go, well, you know what? Actually, those little towns and all the community behind them and getting to know everybody in a diner. I thought that was a really brilliant scene. And said, maybe you don't feel this, given that you've always grown up in London. But one of the things I miss, particularly having moved to London, is that communal element, which I think sometimes we miss in the rat race of commuting on the Jubilee line every day. For our London listeners, I'm sure you know what we're on about. But yeah, I just thought it was really good to say that you're not settling, and there's a real part to be played and part to be said about the importance of community. And I took that, it was really heartwarming element to the story, I thought, and it was done really well.
That's nice, actually. I didn't really think about how the value of, now you mention it, it's a very much a community thing. I mean, I was very much sort of concentrated on the arc of on Phil's arc as sort of self-improvement, obviously, as I mentioned, but to consider it in terms of the value of what happens when you have a tight community, in those, small towns of everyone loves everyone. And the thing is that Puxatawny was always like that. I mean, you see Rita's admiration for, they come in, they dance, they sing until they get calm, and they go by the fire, they warm up, and then they sing some more, and it's lovely. And there's that sort of wholesome community element to that, which is a big part of what makes what the film is saying is valuable. I think that's really nice. Yeah, I like that a lot. It's a great film, isn't it? I mean, Jesus, what a film.
And I liked your idea for the next section, everyone's favourite day. So I'm going to go to you first, I think, Mikey. What stuck out as your favourite day for Phil Connors?
It's an interesting question, because I think it's inferred that Phil actually experiences many more days than we see. You see certain scenes where, whether it's getting her favorite drink, he gets it wrong the first time, then it cuts straight away to, it's obviously the next day and he gets it right, and then moves on to something else. So I think it's inferred that he actually spends maybe years stuck in this day. But I have to say that the one I enjoyed the most was the day where he just pretty much cuts loose. And he's going around the corner, and then Stephen Tobolowsky, aka Ned Ryerson, Phil, and he just punches him out, walks on, and then spends the rest of the day just doing what he wants to do, free of consequence. I have to say I found that a little bit of a guilty pleasure. So that would be my favourite day.
It is a fun day.
How about you, Seb?
I'm going to go, look, I think very, very quickly, the scene when he gets out of the car dressed in like full The Man Is No Name outfit is hilarious. Just going to put that out there. It's really, really funny. And he goes up to the ticket office with some girl and it's like, I've seen this movie over 100 times or something. And it's like, well, I bet you have, because it's all you can do.
I'll have one adult and one two adults.
And Nancy walks by and she said, "Oh, hey, Nancy," and she just obviously doesn't have no idea who he is. and he says, "My ex-fiance doesn't even remember me." It's hilarious. It's so brilliant. I love that. That is very, very funny. But that's not really a day. That's just more like a little joke in there, which is just, I mean, there are so many fantastic little jokes. But I think the best day is, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but the turnaround day, the day when he really is honest with himself and is honest with Rita for the first time in the film, and that is when he meets her in the diner and says, "I'm a god. I'm a god. I know exactly what's going to happen. I know all of these people. I've survived death, through all of these ways," and convinces Rita to that here's a, and goes through, when he's going through the diner and like explaining the life story of every single person in there is hilarious, and saying, and then there's that really emotional bit towards the end of that when he says, and then Larry is gonna, in 10 seconds, Larry is gonna come in and take you away from me. I thought that was just like, it's the first time when we see some real vulnerability and real kind of like melancholic emotion. I mean, because before that hand, all of the times when he commits suicide are actually quite, they're quite slapsticky, they're quite funny, but this was the first time when he really like had a point of no hope almost. And to see throughout that day how him and Rita go close and how they progress and how they have a really beautiful night together, when they're sort of chucking cards into the hat. And then it's that point when sort of Rita falls asleep and he says, is saying these things to her, like, you're the kindest person I've ever met, all of this stuff, I don't deserve you. And then he wakes up again to Sonny and Cher, and he's like, oh, okay. But he has this sense of purpose, and he knows what to do, and that's where the film kind of ramps up and changes, and has a big sea change. And it's a really, really emotional day, and I really enjoy that.
Oh, I tell you what, Seb,
Such a good film.
You're going halfway to redeeming yourself from one of your earlier choices.
I'll put it this way. I'm giving you guys a mixed bag. I'll put it that way.
What about you, Matty? What's your favorite day?
So I think there's a lot of schmush in this film, and what I mean by this, we've covered the feel-good element, and one slight criticism is that for a large portion of it, you think that you know what's going to happen. So when the trope of the days getting repeated started, and he's trying to learn more and more how things work, and for quite a snappy runtime as well. I think it's just shot. Yeah, it's not that long at all. Yeah. So it does move at quite a pace.
101 minutes.
Yeah, so it's not even 2 hours. One bit that I think works really well, and where the film will challenge you, because I think you can get quite comfortable in these type of, we'll call it a romantic comedy, because I think it is to a degree.
Yeah, fundamentally.
Is when the switch flips and he thinks he's cracked it with Rita, but actually he's still a bit of a dick. Mm-hmm. So my favourite scene is when he gets that, I don't know whether he rents it or how he gets that house, and there's him and... Bed and breakfast. Yeah, is it? No. Oh, right, was it? Well, if it was, okay. I don't think it was...
When he's in the room with Rita.
Yeah, and you think you know where it's going to go, and then he just can't quite help himself, and then he's an arsehole again, and then she gives him the old smack, and then he has to start again, and then he actually loses his shit a little bit, doesn't he, in the next scene when he wants to adopt all those kids. But I actually thought that bit when you think it's building to that crescendo of he's going to get in a pants, but actually he's not yet changed. And it takes that bit for him to actually realise that it's not just about learning to say the correct lines. He actually has to fundamentally undergo a change in how he behaves. And at that point, I thought that it was a real good switcheroo that the film did, which doesn't actually happen in a lot of the other elements of the film, because I think it is very comfortable in the trajectory that it follows. But that bit I thought was brilliant and a really good bit of direction.
I think like what we've all touched upon with the kind of different bits are all of those different beats that this film goes through, and how it remains fresh, so fresh for a film where you see the same situation over and over and over again. It's unbelievable how that is done, and the way that he does it is through changing the attitude of the character in each scene. He has the times when he's taking advantage. He goes through these phases where he's gonna do what the fuck he wants. He has the mission of the conquest to get Rita into bed. He goes through the depression and he kills himself. He has the redemption, and then he goes through. And I think you only see the full day. I think you see 3 full days in the film. One is obviously the first day. The second is the second day, which is very, very funny. And then the last one is the last day. The third one is the last day. Those are the only 3 full days you see in the film. And I think it's very interesting, because in between those, the second and third full day, this guy goes through a total and utter character shift. And you can see the difference in how he has that first day to how he has that last day. And it's a true, you feel like you've gone through the whole journey with him. And I think that's a great strength of this film.
Yeah, this is such a loving. We weren't gonna cover this before, but I'm gonna have to ask. Surely we've got one negative thing each to say about this bloody film.
Okay, I'll go last on that.
Mikey?
That's actually a bit of a tough one, Maddie, because I think the concept of the film is good. The script is clever. The dialogue is clever. I think the performances are well done. I mean, Bill Murray is excellent. I did, I think, last week refer to Andie MacDowell as sort of the enigma of the 90s, and I made that comment because she did a lot of stuff in the 90s, a lot of films. Starting with, I think, Green Card in 1990, which was quite a successful romantic comedy. She did this. She did Four Weddings and a Funeral. And then I think as the 90s started to progress, it sort of fell away a little bit. Things like Bad Girls and, Multiplicity. But I mean, watching this film, I kind of do see why she got a lot of work. I don't think she's a brilliant actress, but I think she's a good actress, and just she really conveyed that sort of sweetness and genuine person, genuinely nice character of Rita. I think she did that very well. So, I mean, in terms of negatives about it, there's nothing that's really sort of jumping out at me other than that. I think it's fairly lightweight. It's sort of it's a bit of a candy cane of a movie, but it does have some depth. So maybe I'm being a bit harsh there. So I'm going to struggle with that one. I'll be honest. I can't really there's no massive negative for me.
It's so hard to do. Go on, Matt. Give it your best shot.
It's not Planes, Trains and Automobiles, but that was in the 80s, so I can't really level it at that. No, other than adding some length to Andie MacDowell's IMDb page, can't really give many two complaints about it. It was as much, more so because you chose it, Seb, as much as I really wanted to hate it, even though I'd watched it previously, yeah, it was good. It was feel good cinema, really good. Probably not a lot of films made as well as this nowadays. So yeah, not many complaints from me either.
Well, having laid down the gauntlet, Matty.
I know exactly. I know, but it was just we have just spoken for about 40 minutes about how bloody good it is. So
you were hoping we'd have something, eh, Matty?
I was, and actually, it probably balances it out. And I swear to God, this is the last time I'm going to do this in this podcast for just how much we laid into you for 4 rooms, Seb.
Okay. Well, look. Okay, I think we're going to pick on a negative. I mean, look. We can talk about the implausibility of the plot. We can talk about I would say maybe one negative would be the slight slapsticky levity way that Bill Murray or Phil Connors goes through the depression phase where he's killing himself. I mean, I think it's a pretty difficult subject matter. Obviously, I mean, mental health is a massive issue, and suicide is, a massive killer, and it's a big issue. And the way that this film kind of goes through that very, very dark phase in almost a slapstick way might be something that's sort of leveled at it. And I think particularly his first suicide attempt where he drives the pickup truck with the groundhog out over the canyon. And he's making all these snidey comments and snarky remarks when he's on his way to kill himself. I think maybe that if I've got one criticism, and if I'm being really, really picky, which I think you guys have put me under the spot to do, I think I'll say that.
But as we've ascertained,
but it's also very funny that
it is. Oh yeah, the cop scene's very funny.
Yeah, it is really funny.
And so with that, I move to, as I do every week, it's only fair and right that we judge this film based on the liar metric, and we hold Groundhog Day up against another totemic romantic comedy, the best film to come out of the whole decade, and indeed, arguably, you could say the 20th century as a whole. I can't even remember when cinema started, but it could even just be the apex of all cinema, from silent to talking.
It's where cinema should have ended.
It is where it should have ended. 1997's Liar Liar, whereby we will judge Groundhog Day on the Liar Liar metric, Liar Liar's out of 10. So, Seb, as it's your film, I'll leave you to last. Mikey, how are you going? And you're usually a harsh taskmaster.
Well, I'd like to say fair in my judgments, Matty, but so I'm going to give this 7 Liar Liars out of 10. Whoa. I think it is a good film. I think it's very well done. But I think given that it is a romantic comedy, it's not to be taken seriously. I can think of other romantic comedies in the 90s that were better. So maybe I'm marking to a bell curve, but I'm going with 7 Liar Liars out of 10.
So harsh.
Well, I'm going to go for the exact same score, actually.
Oh, for crying out loud, lads. For two lads who couldn't find anything wrong with the film to give it a 7.
Yeah, but it's not Citizen Kane, is it? I mean, just to expand a bit on what Mikey said, it is a romantic comedy at the end of the day. It's hard to give it, I ain't going to give Bill Murray an Oscar for it, am I? But no, 7 out of 10, I stick by that. I think it's the best 7 out of 10 film it could be. It was really good. It was really enjoyable. It maintained my interest throughout. I thought that it was continuously funny. It challenged you where it needed to, like the scene that I spoke about earlier on. Just a really enjoyable watch. And as I alluded to earlier, I don't think there's enough films made as good as this nowadays. And I don't think there's, I don't know.
Would you say best in class?
Have we watched any other romantic comedies on the podcast? I don't think we have we? Certainly not yet.
American Pie? Not quite a romantic comedy.
Sebastian. No.
Oh, no. Gross out comedy. Do you know what? You've changed my mind. I'm going to give it a 7.5.
Oh, here we go.
I'll give it a 7. I'll give it a half because of Mikey's best in class comment. So, yeah. Really enjoyed the watch.
Not a statement, Matthew. Question.
No, I know. You've questioned me and you've made me reevaluate. Have you ever thought of a career in politics, Mikey? You should.
But in the interim, let's do Batman Forever instead of some other film I can think of.
Seb, we'll leave it to you as this was your choice. What are you giving this?
Look, this is best in class for romantic comedies. This is best in class for comedies. I think this is one of the all-time great comedies. It's got every type of comedy in there. I think probably not satire. That was more Starship Troopers vibe. But it's got
I forgot about that.
It's got pretty much every kind of comedy in there. It's got a beautiful message behind it, and as you both have said, it's an incredibly well executed film. It's a little over an hour and a half. It's got a beautiful structure. It's beautifully executed. It's acted well for what's there for every actor. No one does a bad job. Bill Murray does an outstanding job. I mean, the reason why he won't win an Academy Award for it is because the Academy doesn't particularly like to give out Oscars for comedy, but that's a whole other gripe of mine. And I think this is one of Bill Murray's all-time best performances. Before he went a little bit kooky with Wes Anderson, this is when he was really, really at his peak, at his snarky, hilarious, perfect timing best. And because of all of those things, I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10.
My Lord.
Oh,
such a good film.
So you're telling me...
It's a film that I would watch with anybody, anytime, anywhere.
So you're telling me that this is within touching distance of Jim Carrey greatness?
If any one man can challenge the throne of Jim Carrey, it's Bill Murray.
Blasphemy. Well, thank you very much for that, for you both. I think we've reached an interesting conclusion. Seb sounds to me he's got too much adrenaline flowing through his veins, having just moved house, and has slightly over-egged the pudding on judging.
I might watch it again.
You might watch it again.
So point.
So if we could move on to next week, what will we be looking at?
So, from one classic to another from the golden age of cinema. Next week, we're going to be reviewing David Finch, Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, 1999, the apex, the culmination of the golden age of cinema. We're going to be reviewing Fight Club. And we're going to be breaking the first rule of Fight Club. And we're going to talk about Fight Club.
That's terrible.
That is terrible. And actually, for shame, because you have forgot. I know you've just moved out of Hampstead, but you forgot Hampstead's own Helena Bonham Carter.
Oh yeah, of course, Helena Bonham Carter in very much a supporting role about a film that is, all about masculinity. But
get rid of her. Yeah, I've already picked my favourite scene. Great scene. Yeah, no, very much looking forward to that. It's probably, again, right up there with one of the best films of that decade. Less said about the remaining film after that, the better, just for Mikey's own mental health. But very much looking forward to it, gents, and thank you for this week. Speak to you both soon.
Thanks, Matty. Great stuff.
Goodbye.